Carol, who is going to tell us about impactful learning about the 3D printing process for any major.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for including me in the symposium and also for all the participants attending today. By looking at the title of the presentation, Impactful Learning about the 3D Printing Process for Any Major, you might think, well, this is all about design and I don't need that, but that's actually not what the presentation is about, but it's a fair thing to guess that because most information out there is about the 3D printing design process, primarily for prototyping. So what I'm hoping to do today is to spark some interest in educating those who are not needing design experience in 3D printing. For example, one of the more hot topics in the recent past is 3D printing guns. There is currently no strict legislation on it. The government, federal law says that you can't do it without having metal on it, but there are workarounds with it. However, you also need a fairly fancy 3D printer in order to do something like that. But my hope with that comment is just to say, okay, there's a lot more interest in 3D printing, that's just one hot topic, than about prototyping. And there's a lot more opportunities out there. Again, my name is Carol Putman. I teach supply chain, project management, and statistics courses at Penn State Barron. Prior to my time at Barron, I was an engineer for international paper for approximately 10 years. So you might think, okay, that's where the 3D printing interest came from, and that could be, but there were no 3D printers when I worked for international paper. But I'm an engineer gone business, and I truly enjoy being part of Penn State. So diving into the topic for today, you might, if you look at the picture on the left-hand side there, it's like, well, I've seen that picture before, possibly. Yes, I need to give credit. That picture came from Maker Commons. We'll be referring to our little Nittany Lion 3D printed image there in the future here. I'm going to do a fairly simple polling today. What I'd like to have you do is raise your hand if this applies to you, and then you may have to lower your hand, so if I ask another question then you aren't still waving your hand. But I'd like to find out who in the participants feels like you already have fairly significant experience with 3D printing. Go ahead and raise your hand if you. Okay, looks like a fairly, maybe about 10% of you, which is fairly interesting. And so I'm not speaking to the choir, which is a good thing there. So let's move on to what we need to talk about today. These are the 5 things I'd like to accomplish. First of all, the importance of 3D printing. Why do we need to be looking at 3D printing in academia outside of engineering, biology, the digital arts? Second thing, what is the basic process for someone who is not the tech-savvy person and looking for an alternative use? Third thing, what are some examples in a variety of majors? We'll get to that. That'll be the meat of what we're talking about today. And if you decide to do something like this, what sort of resources are available there for you? And then the 5th thing is kind of a challenge to you. If we were in person, this would be the biggest part, because I was really hoping to have more of an open discussion about where do you see it that you could use it in your own courses, in your own major. So as we're going along through the next few slides, I encourage you to jot down any ideas that you have, because at the end we'll look at some options from the participants. So the first question, and these next 5 slides will be the 5 objectives. So if there's any reason you want to refer back to this presentation, that you'll be able to do that. Why 3D in academia? Take a couple steps back and look at the diagram at the right, where you see a picture of Industry 4.0. If you haven't heard of that before, we've had a couple presentations in the symposium already about it, but Industry 4.0 is basically the 4th recognized industrial revolution. And part of it is you see the 9 emerging technologies around it. And about 11 o'clock, you see augmented reality, which was the previous presentation. The different technologies tend to overlap with each other or interact. Today we're looking at 3D printing. I chose this one because it fit best into my class. If augmented reality or robotics or big data makes more sense for your class, I hope that you can use the content from this presentation in different ways for your own needs. But just giving you an example of overlapping, 3D printing may be used to print sensors within parts. So that would be overlapping with the Internet of Things. If that part happens to be part of a robot, now you've overlapped with robotics. Those sensors typically collect data that is used within cloud computing, which you see down around 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock. And if you have cloud computing, you probably need cybersecurity, which is at the bottom. And you may be doing big data analytics with that data, which you also may be looking at the interrelationship, the horizontal integration and vertical integration, which is another type of technology. Now, there's different definitions of Industry 4.0, but this one tends to be, with the 9 technologies, tends to be the most agreed upon. So we've looked at the basics of Industry 4.0 and 3D printing and why it might be important. AACSB is an accreditation association for business schools, and it's widely recognized. It is said that Industry 4.0 is a strong connection potential between businesses and academia. So if it's important to businesses, and it's important to our students, it should definitely be important to us teaching those classes. So I hope that gives you the gist of the importance from that previous slide. We're going to jump into the process next here, our second objective. In small print, right below the title, here is the, I guess it would be 3D printing for dummies version on my slide. How to get an idea and put it into an object that students can learn from with hands-on learning, problem-solving type of opportunities in the class. The 3D printed lion, somebody went out and took several pictures of the scans of the Nittany lion and then turned that into a CAD. Now, if I lost you there, I already lost myself too, if that was what I was required to do. There's a nice shortcut, which if you look on the right side of your screen in the top left-hand box, there are websites. The one I chose was Thingiverse. And I went to Thingiverse and typed in Nittany lion, and you come up with these different images in the search screen. The nice thing about that is other people have voluntarily shared their designs, their CAD designs, computer-aided designs, with people who really don't have the design ability. So you can shortcut going from the scanning to the CAD, and then my top right picture is the image that I chose is the 3D printed lion there. And when you click on that, now you can download the files. So it's really a matter of like shopping on Amazon. Once you download the file, you need a second step because you're not done there. You can't go straight to the printer. The next step in the process is to take the STL file, which you can see in the process at the left, and load that file into a slicing app. With my printer, and there are some web-based ones that are also free, you can then turn that CAD file into a file that's ready to go to a 3D printer. Now, if you're really a chicken, you can just say, all right, I'm going to take whatever they give me and not modify anything. But you can change the size. Do you want it to be a hollow Nittany lion? Do you want it to be solid on the inside? There's some pretty easy to follow options. But what the slicing app does is it cuts that image into layers that are then printed, and it also part of the file says how should the print head move around to print that particular object. Once you've got that done, you then export a G-code file that is ready to go to the printer. Mine uses an SD card, so I have to load it onto the SD card, then go to the printer, and then it's just like going to the copier, and you say print, and it 3D prints your object. So it's really pretty straightforward. We're used to typically seeing very cheapy type of plastic toy type of output from 3D printers like you would see on the bottom left of the screen. But it's important to recognize that there's over 250 different types of materials that can be 3D printed. Different types of metals like steel or titanium. There's glass, ceramics. One of my favorites is chocolate. So as this technology is being developed and improved, some things that they're working on are the speed of printing, the quality of printing, and the lowering the cost. Another big enhancement that they're working on is trying to combine materials. So I'm really looking forward to the day personally where I can 3D print a ceramic plate and then 3D print a piece of chocolate on top of that plate. A little humorous example, but I think you can see as the number of uses and abilities and ideas for using 3D printers increases, the opportunities for academia and businesses to interact it also goes up. Companies are looking to universities to help them decide when do they pull the trigger on getting a 3D printer, what should they be looking for, and what's the right price point and features that they should be looking for in the printing process. Okay, let's jump into a couple examples here then, what we really want to be taking a look at, and I think there's a question, I'll try to get to that in a moment here. But starting with the example that I used, supply chain management, introductory course, people in a variety of majors, a lot of business majors, but not necessarily, there's some engineers and science majors as well. What my intention was to use it as a pedagogical enhancement to demonstrate the print and have students discuss the impact on supply chain management topics that are listed on the slide here. For example, inventory. One of the cool things that 3D printers can do is print movable parts, so like a hinge or a part within a part. So what the impact on inventory is reduced cost and number of items, because what may have taken 4 pieces that needed to be assembled together, a 3D printer might be able to print that all as one. And another thing is parts that are very high in complexity and low in numbers. You don't want to have those sitting around in inventory. They can be 3D printed off on demand. Customization of design for a certain customer is another supply chain type of consideration. Capacity. 3D printers aren't the fastest things in the world, so there's a trade-off in terms of how much can we print out versus the traditional way of manufacturing. And then also logistics. Typically, when you order something, a company makes it and then they ship it to you. But the future with 3D printing is likely to be that they print the file, maybe somewhere locally, maybe directly to you, and then you print it locally yourselves. So the need for mass transit in large unit sizes goes down. So I'd like to ask another quick question here about my idea of using it as a pedagogical enhancement and printing it in the classroom. Raise your hand if you think that that was a really good idea to do. Give you just a couple seconds to react there. Okay, so again, about 10% of you said that yes, it was a good idea. I thought it was a great idea, and thank goodness I practiced ahead of time, because to print off that Nittany line, and if you can see me, it's this big. It took about 8 hours to print that off. So thank goodness I practiced it in ahead of time, because it wasn't a good thing to do in the classroom. Just to kind of go through the pictures on the screen here briefly. On the right-hand side, I said that students, a lot of students thought that they were already familiar with 3D printing, but when they saw this in my office, they're like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. Well, I thought you were already familiar, but they weren't familiar with the actual printing process. And what you can see on the right-hand side here is the honeycomb type of feature that can add a lot of strength to the printed product. So that was kind of a neat thing. They're not as savvy as they thought they were. They're more used to kind of the toy type of feature that isn't as fancy. The picture on the bottom left is just a simple version of what my 3D printer looks like. I use the filament type, it's less expensive. And the picture in the top in the center, why the heck a tennis shoe? Yes, it's 3D printed, but a really cool thing that I saw about this is the Adidas Verge tennis shoe. It was actually 3D printed out of ocean waste. So that really gets the attention of especially the environmental scientists in the classroom going, oh my gosh, there's a problem solving opportunity. And so again, to kind of go, wow, we can solve problems in the classroom talking about 3D printing, not necessarily learning about the design. Continue on here. So now to move on with examples that you might have. I'm just going to give you some examples that I've seen or I've considered trying to reach out across different majors. First of all, in the top left-hand corner, you've got a policy that could be written on 3D printing, or even something as simple as a user's manual. It would be appropriate for an English class, a communications class, a foreign language class, anything, a political science class might be appropriate. Moving to the top right, our friend the Rubik's Cube, that one happened to be printed by a 3D printer. So for example, in psychology, where you've got learning and memory as a key topic, maybe you could invent a new type of puzzle that would then be used to test learning and memory. Just a unique example. Bottom left-hand corner, in terms of archaeology, there's the British Museum is already scanning artifacts such as the pharaoh shown there, where people can print them out, so you have hands-on experience with 3D printers and the artifacts that you're looking at. Bottom right, in history, maybe you invent or design a game or an activity related to the sequencing of events in Roman history, something like that. So those are just some quick ideas, some suggestions in terms of making sure that that if you're going to use it in class, that you've got a plan. First, you're not in the business, most likely, of teaching 3D printing, but you want to be able to connect the 3D printing to the course topic. Make sure that that it's relevant somehow to enhance the student's educational experience. And then what benefits are they going to get from 3D printing? Is it just in there as a space filler? It's better if they have something in hand that makes it more of an enriched experience, or they're solving a problem like the tennis shoe. And then also I encourage you to consider short-term activities so that it's not something that becomes more of a burden than an actual exciter in your classroom. So if you're thinking that maybe you might want to use this, even in the virtual classes, if you're going to be doing that this fall, I want to give you a couple ideas for resources. Yes, you could go out and buy your own 3D printer. You're probably going to want to go fairly inexpensive, something that's fairly fast, and something that's easy to use. But in the world of 3D printers, easy to use doesn't necessarily go hand in hand with the cheapness factor. So one of these other two resources that I have listed here might be a good place to start and say, what do I do in terms of buying one? Or if you don't want to buy one, these two resources should be helpful. First of all, Maker Commons, which was developed in 2016, is a resource for all Penn State students. You can look them up on the Penn State website. They advertise a lot of prototyping and design help, which is, again, a lot of what people are looking at in terms of 3D printing, but they're probably very helpful in other respects as well in terms of, hey, how can I incorporate this in my classroom? The second one is Innovation Commons at Barron. They are more in tune with entrepreneurial type of work, working with regional industry. If you're doing research that you want to incorporate 3D, they would be a great resource too. The picture that you see here is a 3D scanner that's 7 feet that the students that work in the lab at Barron developed. So if you're under 7 feet tall, you could literally scan yourself and then follow the steps in the earlier slide to 3D print yourself or some other larger object. So kind of cool there. So I want to move on then to the challenge. Ideas for your courses. You want to make sure that you're applying to the topics that are being learned, integrating with other technology if it's appropriate, and then also focusing in on improved productivity. So I have the drone listed there, but I want to focus on the bottom, the picture. It's a 3D printed building. And so one of the examples that you might consider, the 3D printed houses, if you've heard of those, they tend to waste less cement and are more cost effective than the traditional method of building houses. Just to give you a couple pieces of data here, I threw my wrong paper away here, the 3D printed house in Mexico, where they're building about a 500 square foot structure, that they're able to build those within 24 hours. So when you think about hurricane relief or impoverished areas, this is really a great opportunity, which is likely going to be enhanced for building homes in all different areas. So areas to think about: food, healthcare, construction, like we just saw with the 3D printed house, textiles, including clothing, things like curtains, transportation, aviation is big into 3D printing, furniture and home goods. I've basically listed just about anything that you could go out and purchase. These impact our lives, and they could be impacting our classrooms. So I'd like to bring it over to the Q&A and have you type in any ideas, suggestions that you may have come up with in the last 20-ish minutes. I'm going to read some of the things here from Wade. I printed a DNA protein molecule for my biology 110 and faculty member, which he loved. I've heard, the molecule kits that we used to have back if you were an engineer, that yeah, now you can actually print the specific molecule, which is great for studying. Susan said at Penn State Altoona, we have Camp Lab available, and shared the website. Thank you for that as well. So any ideas out there in terms of how you might use this in a different major? Biology, digital arts, those are easy ones. Engineering, anybody have any unique ideas? Going to go on to the next slide as if you're thinking of anything here. In the meantime, I just want to say thank you. Good luck with preparing all of your fall classes. We've got some exciting opportunities ahead of us here for the fall curriculum. And if there's an opportunity to include 3D printing or another Industry 4.0 technology in your classroom, I encourage you to do so. My contact information is on the bottom of this slide. If there's any reason that you'd want to share an idea, I'd love to hear what you might come up with, or if you have questions about things that I have done, I'm happy to communicate with you outside of the symposium. So Wade said instruments. That would be a great thing. So yeah, if you have to print things for any sort of a lab, that could be 3D printing. Even something as simple as a flask might be helpful. Mixing cups, all that kind of stuff would be fun to try. Okay, I am not able to, for some reason, to click on the Q&A right now. because
We can read those out to you, Carol.
thank
We
you,
can,
because it's
yep.
not showing up.
Okay. So Laura has a question. How would you put a 3D image in an academic poster? Or could you put a 3D image in an academic poster?
So that would be more of a 2D thing in a poster, which would be more of a CAD type of diagram. But you may be able to, I would suggest doing something like a QR code that someone could scan the QR code and then on a screen see a 3D printing process in action, if that would be helpful.
And Susan says she printed a pinhole camera for one of her classes. Also different column orders for art history.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Art history is one of those, it's like you can't, it's so hard to do art history in person, and 3D printing, I think, is a cool way to enhance that. They can actually get their hands on it. Great.
Yeah, she also said she'd like to print more stuff as examples for her art history survey, like different types of Greek vases.
Check the British Museum.
Yes. And Eric also had a comment about musical instruments for music classes.
A question about that, or just a comment?
Just a comment. I think how
yes.
it was used similar to what Wade had mentioned.
Yeah, and just to take that one step further, we actually, the lab at Barron is working with an organ company that they needed replacement parts for when they do organ repair. Well, they're now 3D printing some of those parts that aren't part of the acoustics, which is really cool. So yes, it is part of the music industry as well.
Thank you. That's it for right now. We have no other open questions.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. I know that you need to do some wrap up. Again, if anybody would like to contact me, my email is at the bottom, and I thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Carol. We really appreciate you sharing the ways you've used 3D printing as pedagogical enhancements to your course. And we want to thank all of our presenters today for sharing their efforts to transform teaching and enhance the learning experience for our Penn State students with the symposium audience today. And lastly, thank you to all of our audience members for taking time out of your Wednesday morning to join us. And we look forward to seeing you at our next session, which will be next Wednesday, July 1st at 10 o'clock a.m. Thank you all for your time, and we hope to see you next week.